have a saying when it comes to online criticism of entertainment. Never trust a critic who hasn't paid for their own ticket. Mainly because you'll get an actual honest review from that person. And the reason why is because if you're a part of the access media, you have to say nice things in order to make sure that you continue to have access, despite the fact whether you hated it or not. Because the majority of the time when the access media is giving their opinion, it's not necessarily going to be honest. Because if you say the wrong thing about the wrong movie, well, you might find in the future you are just being left out. And to further illustrate my point, I'm going to play this clip from Danny Roth of Sci-Fi Wire.
Everybody in our industry occasionally has to play softball, occasionally has to, look the other way a little bit. Everybody has to do it.
Wait, returning what? Like a movie
in the
bad,
sense that,
or?
I hated a movie, but I won't say that I hated the movie. Or an actor behaved a sort of way, and you don't want to, put it out there that happened.
Right, because you might not get the next review,
right.
next gig.
So to some degree, everybody in our industry that is a part of this quote-unquote access media has to sort of decide which battles they want to pick.
What really kind of brought this up to the forefront was back when Captain Marvel came out. And if you just listen to the access media, they're going to tell you that a bunch of misogynists and trolls went to Rotten Tomatoes and review bombed a movie before it even came out, which is not the case. Back in 2019, you could go to a movie that hasn't come out yet and talk about whether you want to go and see the movie or not. The idea was to get people hyped to see a movie, and people could just go and comment. They could not leave reviews. That's the big lie, the hoodwink, the shim-sham, the obfuscation of truth. Rotten Tomatoes makes big changes following Captain Marvel review bombing. What really kind of highlights what my point is in this line right here. Users will no longer be able to post reviews or comments. Comments being the key word because you can't post a review before it's even live. You can't rate the movie. You can only leave a comment to a movie's page on Rotten Tomatoes prior to its release. Now you can say before this happened, Rotten Tomatoes has always been a little bit sus, but this really called into question the authenticity and the validity of Rotten Tomatoes. And the one thing that always gets brought up is negative review bombing and not positive review bombing, which is also a thing. And now with the backstory out of the way, we can finally talk about what is currently happening. This article comes from Vulture. The decomposition of Rotten Tomatoes, the most overrated metric in movies, is erratic, reductive, and easily hacked, and yet has Hollywood in its grip. And the key takeaway from this is, well, no duh. If only there were people out there on the internet who've been talking about this for years. But at the end of the day, there's the things you know, and then there's what you can prove in court. Now, this is a very long article, and I'm just going to hit the highlights because these are the things that are the most important. In 2018, a movie publicity company called Bunker 15 took on a new project, Ophelia, a feminist retelling of Hamlet starring Daisy Ridley. Critics who had seen early screenings had published 13 reviews, 7 of them negative, which translates to a score of 46% on the all-important aggregation site Rotten Tomatoes. A disappointing outcome for a film with prestige aspirations and no domestic distributor. But just because the tomato meter says it's a little rotten, scoring below the 60% mark, it doesn't need to stay that way. Bunker 15 went to work. While most film PR companies aim to get the attention of critics from top publications, Bunker 15 takes a more bottom-up approach, recruiting obscure, often self-published critics who are nevertheless part of a pool tracked by Rotten Tomatoes. In another break from standard practices, several critics say Bunker 15 pays them $50 or more for each review. These payments are typically not disclosed, and Rotten Tomatoes says it prohibits reviews based on financial incentives. But yet, these things still happen anyway. Like I said, never trust a critic who doesn't pay for their own ticket. Now, when I call critics bought and paid for shills, it was said as an insult, but deep down inside, I knew it to be somewhat true. But now there's actual evidence to back up my claim. And just because there isn't a monetary incentive for all critics doesn't mean that they aren't getting paid in some form or fashion. Like I said, there's a reason why we call them the access media, because they're being paid for in access, early access. But this just takes it to a whole new different level though. In reality, this is something that is not new. In radio, there's something called payola, where record labels will go and pay disc jocks to go and play certain songs that they want to get popular. popular, because the more popular that song is, the more likely that album would be sold. And this, quite frankly, is really no different. In October of that year, an employee from the company emailed a prospective reviewer about Ophelia. It's a Sundance film, and the feeling is that it's been treated a bit harshly by some critics. I'm sure sky-high expectations were the culprit, so the teams involved feel like it would benefit from more input from different critics. And yes, that is exactly what it sounds like. They are trying to make a positive out of a negative by going and getting different voices that are going to go and boost the rating. And this is exactly what the article goes into. More input from different critics is not very subtle code, and the prospective critic wrote back to ask what happens if I hate the film. The Bunker 15 employee replied that of course journalists are free to write whatever they feel, but the super nice ones, and there are more critics like this than I would have expected, often agreed not to publish bad reviews on their usual website, but to instead quarantine them on a smaller blog that RT never sees. I think it's a very cool thing to do. If done right, the trick would help ensure that Rotten Tomatoes logged positive reviews, but not negative ones. And mind you, all of this has been going on way before the controversy around Captain Marvel. And this is the obvious, blatant fortification of positive reviews for movies. And if there's one, there's gotta be many more, and who knows how long this has actually been going on for. And to a degree, I kinda get it. A movie company that invests a lot of money into making a film wants people to go and see it so they can go and recoup their money and obviously make a profit. The obvious counter to that is, well, make a good movie. And then people might want to show up to the theater and part with their hard-earned cash. But that's easier said than done. It's the reason why we keep getting reboots and sequels to movies, because they've been proven until this summer basically kind of blown all that out of the water. Barbenheimer being the prime example of this. There were a lot of alleged sure things that came out this year that did poorly, like The Flash, because superhero movies, and Indiana Jones 5, which flopped like nobody's business. And even Mission Impossible Part 1 Dead Reckoning, which I thought would have been a sure thing because I felt it was a great action film, didn't do as well as its predecessor. Hopefully Hollywood realizes that the age of the sure thing has come to an end, but that's probably not the message that's going to be taken away from this. Between October 2018 and July 2019, Rotten Tomatoes added 8 reviews to Ophelia's score, 7 favorable, and most came from critics who have reviewed at least one other Bunker 15 movie. The writer of a negative review says that Bunker 15 lobbied them to change it. If the critic wanted to give it a barely overall positive, then I do know editors at Rotten Tomatoes and can get it switched, a Bunker 15 employee wrote. And all of this actually does make sense, because there's times where we see positive reviews that really aren't that flattering to the movie. It's the reason why we see such reviews as, "This movie's a hot mess and the plot is terrible, 9 out of 10. I also discovered another negative review of Ophelia from this period that was not counted by Rotten Tomatoes, but a writer whose positive review of other Bunker 15 films have been recorded by the aggregator. Ophelia climbed the tomato meter to 62%, bumping from rotten to fresh. The next month, the distributor, IFC Films, announced that it had acquired Ophelia for release in the US. And let's be honest here, that would not have happened if it wasn't for the fact that movie went from rotten to fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. Like I said, this is an awfully long article and there's other things I want to cover from it, but this, quite frankly, is truly the case study for what has been going on. Another example of how they've been going and gaming the system is what they will do is find critics who are going to be more favorable to the movie, and they will go and give the first batch of reviews during the review embargo, which led to Ant-Man having a 79% on Rotten Tomatoes. However, once that review embargo was lifted and more critics weighed in, it sank into the 40s. In a nutshell, this gave Quantumania a false start. Yes, it had a very significant opening, but that quickly died down as word of mouth spread that the movie was complete crap. Now, another example of things going the opposite direction is with Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, which got a 33% on Rotten Tomatoes during its review embargo, and that's because they debuted it at Cannes, and quite frankly, the movie just tanked at that point. However, yes, the review score did go up to 69% on Rotten Tomatoes after more favorable reviews came out for it, and ultimately the movie just completely tanked because it was shit, with the movie ranking an abysmal $370 million, which doesn't even cover the budget of the movie at this point, let alone theaters or marketing. All of this would be one thing if Rotten Tomatoes were merely an innocent relic from Web 1.0, being preyed upon by Hollywood sharks, but the site has come a long way from its founding in 1998 by UC Berkeley grads, one of whom wanted to place 2 catalog reviews of Jackie Chan movies. Rotten Tomatoes would outlast the dot-com bubble and was passed around from one buyer to another, most recently in 2016. That year, Warner Bros. Sold most of it to Fandango, which shares a parent company with Universal Pictures. If it sounds like a conflict of interest, well, that's because it is. If it sounds like a conflict of interest for a movie review aggregator to be owned by 2 companies that make movies and another that sells tickets to them, it probably is. A big change came in 2018 when Rotten Tomatoes loosened the restrictions on whose reviews could be indexed. Once the site had required its contributors to write for publications with substantial web traffic or print circulations. Now, more freelance and self-published critics have been allowed to join, along with some who review movies via YouTube or podcasts. Now granted, all this was done under the guise of diversity, equity, and inclusion by adding more voices to the pool. However, the unintended effect is it basically just meant that people were going to be more favorable to these IPs than had been previously. Could the allegedly more inclusive Rotten Tomatoes have simply expanded its ranks in hopes that the new critics would be nicer to the IP-driven event movies that Hollywood now mostly depends on? Personally, I think the answer to that question is a resounding yes. Intentional or not, this appears to be what happened. According to a study by Global News in 2016, the average Tomatometer score for all wide releases was in the low rotten 50s. By 2021, that average had climbed to a fresh 60%. However, this may have gone and benefited mainstream movies. The article points out the fact that what really happened is that this had hurt independent films. The benefit had not been universally distributed. Some I spoke with have complained that Rotten Tomatoes' larger pool has been tougher on art house movies. Maybe the indie director should have hired Bunker 15. Rotten Tomatoes' new membership rules might have enabled the publicity company's MO by providing a wider supply of critics receptive to its pitch, which seems to have become more explicit over time. I would like to know if you don't post negative reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, a Bunker 15 employee wrote to one critic in August of 2022. Now, one thing I thought was kind of interesting is that if you actually go and look for Ophelia on Rotten Tomatoes, you can't find it. And the article actually explains why. After I asked Rotten Tomatoes about Bunker 15, it delisted a number of the company's movies from the website and sent a warning to the writers who reviewed them. And like I said, if you go and search for Ophelia, it doesn't come up. For a number of years, we've known that Rotten Tomato, for lack of a better term, is rotten. We just now can actually prove it. Sites like Rotten Tomatoes is supposed to be about protecting the customer, but at the end of the day, it's all about protecting the big business. Companies like Disney, Warner Brothers, and many others. At the end of the day, if Hollywood really wanted to improve things, it would just simply make better movies. However, it's a lot easier for them to go and just make content and force it on you. Don't like the corporate slop you're being fed? Well, they'll find some way of calling you an istophobe. Yes, moral blackmail is the key, and sadly, there will be legions of morons that are willing to stand in front of these companies to be their human shields, or lie to you in the form of Access Media reviews. However, Rotten Tomatoes is not actually the problem, it is just the symptom of a greater problem, and that problem is Hollywood. Anyway, folks, that is my take. What is yours? Leave a comment down below. Make sure to hit that thumbs up on your way out if you enjoyed the video, and check out this next video that's coming up. I'll catch you next time, folks.